This assignment is called Personal Protection. And the inspiration behind creating this was the idea that our entire lives have totally changed due to the coronavirus pandemic and how we've all had to adjust our ways of just living, just going to the grocery store, and functioning. We have to constantly think about the idea of personal protection. You now have to walk into a lot of grocery stores or a lot of businesses with masks on, and it's highly recommended that you wear masks to not only protect yourself but others from the spread of this really dangerous virus that we're encountering right now. And I thought it would be really interesting to base an assignment off of this because personal protection is something that we have on our minds right now, and it could be really interesting to make some art in response to that. So for this assignment, I have several examples of different artists who work well with the idea of personal protection. A lot of them either use the body or they're creating specific objects that are meant for the idea of protection. So this is kind of a short PowerPoint presentation because I have a lecture that accompanies this particular slideshow that is about an hour long, but it is really great. It is based on the history of germ warfare in the Victorian era. So it'll give you some really interesting perspective on this assignment as well. So the first artist that we are going to go over, her name is Rebecca Horn. Rebecca Horn is very famous for creating what's called body extensions, which is using sculptural material to kind of build off the body or create a sculpture in response to the body. So with this first piece on the far left, we've got Rebecca Horn using these quill-like objects in order to kind of shield her body from the torso in the front side and the back side. Then she has these other two pieces where they're kind of, one's wing-like, and she could essentially, use that material to kind of extend her body longer or make her wingspan, in this case, a lot longer than her normal body. The third piece on the far right is more of like a punctuation, but then again, she's kind of using that similar concept to that first piece where she's using these different linear elements that are kind of extruding from her body and kind of shielding herself in a lot of ways. Rebecca Horn's work's really interesting. She has a very, very large, extensive body of work having to do with the body extensions. So she has many, many different examples. So if you enjoy what you're seeing on the screen here, I highly recommend looking at her work a little bit more extensively. The next artist is using meat as a way to kind of build off the body. This is meant to be like a superhero suit, but then he also has this kind of ironic relationship that's happening with the material because meat's like a really kind of raw, like vulnerable material. It's going to decay and it's going to, eventually smell really bad. So, thinking about like this idea of a superhero, but then it's kind of like a self deprecating relationship because the meat's going to deteriorate and rot, and it's also not a material that is really protective. It's one that's like really soft, it's mushy, it's not really going to physically protect you like say if this were made out of like steel. So I think the concept behind his work's really interesting, and then the idea that it is based off of a superhero suit, and a superhero is perceived as someone that's invincible or powerful. He's referencing the shape of that, but then the material itself is kind of the opposite. So, materiality can really come in very handy for this assignment. You can really think about, what those materials communicate to your viewer. It's really important. The next artist we're going to cover is Natani Nota, who is a Navajo artist. She's based in Southern California right now, but she's part of the Navajo tribe which is based in like the Arizona, New Mexico area. And with her piece, she's actually using personal protective gear. She's using an N95 mask. And what she's done is she's sewn seed beads into the mask pattern itself. So, here she's, heavily referencing her cultural heritage and what, she grew up with. So if you've ever seen like a lot of Navajo clothing or jewelry, a lot of times they're decorated with seed beads, and doing this seed bead process is like really intimate and it's really precise. So in order for her to make this, it was a lot of patience, a lot of hard work. So, really thinking about, again, those materials, materials and what they reference is really important. So this is actually one of my pieces, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the concept behind this, which is part of a series I'm working on called Kitchen War Room. So if you were to think that, suddenly you had to go to war and you had to pull things out of your kitchen that you could use as like weaponry, that's kind of the idea behind this series of work is, what happens if you turn your standard kitchen tools into like medieval weapons of war. And this piece is a spiky rolling pin, so it kind of looks like a medieval torture device, but then it's a rolling pin that you'd typically make your cookies with, or, bread or whatever, you'd bake with this. So, I kind of like that ironic relationship between something that's like really domestic and kind of tame, and we're used to that being like a comfortable thing in the home, but then turning it into something, a little bit more tough and vicious. So this is my rolling pin weapon here. Next work I'm going to talk about is by the Yes Men, and be sure to watch that YouTube link in the slideshow presentation. It'll go into the project a little bit more specifically, but the history of the Yes Men is what they do is they tend to pose themselves as like corporate consultants of some kind, or they'll tend to infiltrate these kind of like big evil corporations in order to kind of embarrass them, or kind of just highlight ridiculous, using humor. They highlight ridiculous things that these companies are kind of known for. So in this case, this is a personal protective suit that they were pitching to Halliburton. And what happens with this suit is quite hilarious. You'll see it in detail with the video. But these suits, they're quite ridiculous looking. They kind of look like these weird little sea creature people. And these suits are supposed to protect you against like really severe environmental issues that Halliburton could potentially cause, like oil spills or what have you. So the Yes Men made this whole campaign pitching these really strange suits. So check out that YouTube video to see the entirety of the scheme and kind of like how they got away with it. It's really interesting. The next artist I'm going to talk about uses the idea of personal protection, a little bit more like, kind of like how the Tani Nota used the actual safety gear. Lorena Lourenco is doing a very similar thing. This is a figure where she has her dress kind of like soaked in tar and, embedded to the ground. And then she's wearing a gas mask, to kind of, illustrate like wading through, water. A lot of her work has to do with environmental issues that are, just really toxic to the environment. So she created this figure. This is made out of ceramic, and then she used fabric for the dress and the mask, and then she used actual tar for the base part on the bottom. And again, another one that's using the actual safety gear and the personal protective equipment, this is Muriel Euclides. Muriel Euclides does a lot of work in relation to labor. And this piece here, this is a memorial arch to sanitation workers. So these are all different kinds of like donated gloves, different kinds of gear that you would see sanitation workers using every day. And she wanted to make this large memorial arch to honor them in a lot of ways. So, again, you could use the actual safety gear, and create a piece in response to it, or even using it to kind of like build sculpture off of. Zoe Buckman, I wanted to use this as an example because she, in this case, is kind of using the offensive as a defense. So she's using boxing gloves as kind of like her personal protection material. And I thought she used it in very interesting ways. The first one on the left is a uterus, and then the second one is covered in doily material and different kinds of fabrics. So they're like really kind of dainty, feminine type boxing gloves. So I thought she used the idea of personal protection in a really interesting way. Another one's Tom Sachs, and Tom Sachs is using personal protection where it's looking like samurai warrior armor. So he's using personal protective gear to make it that reference as well. And he's also using strange things like a feather duster, and just kind of different materials in order to illustrate that. So Tom Sachs' work uses a lot of quirky materials in general, and I highly recommend taking a look at what he does further in depth as well. The last artist I'm going to show you is more of an object-based interpretation of personal protection. And I thought the idea that she used here, where she's using the jars, it's almost kind of like preservation as protection, where she has this chopped up tree and she's using all of the jars to kind of reconstruct it in a different ways and preserve it. And it kind of has like an eerie feel to it because, the tree's technically not alive, but then, you know, she's keeping it in these jars so it almost seems like it is, but it really isn't. So she has a really great concept there. I thought was interesting to use as an example. So go ahead and check these out a little bit more in depth. Check the Yes Men link out, and also don't forget to read the article on germ warfare and the Victorian lecture on germ warfare.